Hello, Mr. Brad Shuck.
Hey, what's going on? All right.
Yeah, we're okay here. Hope you're well. We're hoping to be
Yeah.
joined by Martin. He looks like we'll jump in a moment. But let's go ahead and start talking adaptation as employees get used to working remotely during this pandemic. I've been doing remote for a long time, for over a decade actually. So I'm pretty used to the differences of working from home versus being surrounded by my colleagues in an office. And I think a good place to start today is to talk about all the changes that people need to expect to perform, both from the tools, but also all the way over to the soft skills as they get used to working without their colleagues next to them. When we think about the office, think about all the places where we interact. Everything from our desk and talking to people sitting around us. We've got the conference room where we have our meetings and our whiteboards and our screens, and we share those in real time. We have the water cooler in the kitchen for those moments where you bond. And then we also have the hallways, right, where you just happen to collide with someone maybe you haven't seen all week, and you get a chance to, say, hey, how's the family? But oftentimes those conversations bleed into, oh, did you hear about that thing? Decision that came out of the conference yesterday or whatever it might be. That is really how effective information transfers across an organization in these sort of side moments. But when we're all working remotely, we don't have those moments. We're now behind our own screens. There's no one next to us. There's no hallways to walk down. We have things like Slack and Microsoft Teams where someone might say something because communication is fairly transparent there. You get to learn about it if you have the time to read all the information coming through, but there's a lot of noise, and that's very distracting as well. And our conference rooms were replaced by video conferencing, something that kind of feels like this live stream, right? Where, hey, I get to see your face, Brad, and it's awesome. Nice smile, thumbs up. I can read your body language. That's really important. And I know everyone right now is getting into things like Zoom and WebEx and kind of building their video conferencing muscles right now and learning some new etiquette and everything. That's awesome. But I'm seeing now where, look, today is March 25th, 26th? Yeah, 26th. We are like in week 2 or 3 for most people around the United States of what we'll call lockdown, right? Getting used to this distributed work. The conversation is starting to move from, okay, technically I feel pretty comfortable now about how to do this, and now we're starting to get to the places like etiquette. How can I be a good participant on these calls? Learning the mute button and things like this. Part of this is, of course, not stepping on each other's toes, not interrupting. But there's a whole other side of this that's outside of the video conferencing, which is just how to be a good collaborator right now when my tools are really limited. Email, the Slacks and Microsoft Teams, the video conferencing. We went from like all of these sort of moments in the office where all this stuff could kind of organically happen to now you have to be a proactive communicator because there's no sort of organic communication. Everyone has to think about what they need to make sure other people do and how to get it out there in terms of awareness. Brad, I'm going to throw it over to you now. You've been studying employee engagement for a long time, and I'm curious to see if you've ever learned anything related to people feeling connected to their colleagues and also feeling like they belong to the purpose of their organization as it relates to the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you mentioned The Office, I immediately thought of the show The Office, and that all of the things that happened in that show are kind of now playing out in real time in our organizations. And so conversations with Toby, conversations between Jim and Pam, conversations between Dwight and I mean, it was some of those things are now kind of like beginning to manifest themselves, but they're doing that in an online environment, which is it's kind of funny to watch happen, right? Here's what I struggle with personally. So I'm just gonna be kind of vulnerable and transparent for a minute is this is about planning for me. And sometimes I'll get on a call like this, and I've been on, man, it's 10:15. I've already been on 2 video conference calls this morning. And I was on video calls all day yesterday and on the telephone. And I did not give myself adequate time to plan. Hey, what's up, Martin? How you doing, man? I just didn't give myself time to plan. And doing this in a way that's gonna promote collaboration means that I've got to dedicate some prep time to those meetings in the same ways that I would if I was in the office, right? And those impromptu conversations that are happening through Slack or Microsoft Teams or even just over email are still really important, because they are, in some ways, the ways the decisions in the big meetings get done. The way that I love to think about collaboration in this kind of architected environment is that collaboration is the heartbeat of your culture. And if your heartbeat is beating slowly, and people aren't collaborating, you're really not thriving. You're gasping for air. If your heartbeat is racing, right, and there's so much collaboration and so much volume.
I was hoping you were going to go there.
Yeah, it can get different, right? And it can be very difficult to keep up with all the communication and difficult to keep up with all of the information. And so now you're winded here, right? And so there's this kind of sweet spot for how we collaborate together and how we work together in ways that allow us to really thrive as an organization.
All right, Martin, I'm glad you were jumped on here. We're talking all things adapting to the new reality of remote work and really focused on how to be a good communicator. We were talking about, we're not in office anymore. There's no more kitchens or hallways to have those encounters. There's no more conference room where we're just all around each other. There's no more taps on the shoulder at the desk. Wow, brave new world here of realizing we're stuck with email, instant messengers like Slack and Teams, and video conferencing. That's not much, right? You got to really be proactive with communicating here. So Martin, you're a consultant with OnPlane. You go into companies all the time and try to help them figure out how to cultivate culture all the way down to HR needs. How much time do you spend with coaching people in the kind of past here, before the pandemic, of helping them be better communicators?
Yeah. So this is going to sound silly, but this concept in my mind around muscle memory, which is really like, so you're wearing a Reds jersey, and I know you're a baseball guy. And
happy opening day today, right? Obviously no baseball, but it's Reds would be playing today.
That's right. But you know, if you think about this from the standpoint of muscle memory, a baseball swing is all driven by muscle memory, and it's thousands of repetitions. And you even see when a player is trying, especially in the majors or in the minors, trying to fix their swing, and their coach is saying, hey, you got to do this just a little bit different. They almost take a step back for weeks, maybe even a season, to sort out these little tweaks inside their swing. And what we're dealing with right now is a fundamental change in the muscle memory that all of us have built up in terms of how we interact all the time. And it takes this big step back to some of these really fundamental things like you would inside of a swing. Where do you put your feet? When do you drop your hands? Where does your shoulder go? And it's all this almost painful detail, but that gets translated, or should get translated, back into the workplace in really basic stuff, right? So like, how are we going to use email? How are we going to use Teams? What browser are we going to use? I was late because I was trying to do this in Internet Explorer, and I forgot that we were in Chrome, and then my camera wouldn't work, and Charlie couldn't see me, and I was closing everything down, and then he's like, "Are you using Chrome?" And I'm like, "No." And so much of this is the muscle memory that we're trying to build, and a lot of the engagements and places where we start are these almost painful. It's painful to me because I'm not a detail person, but almost painful, like, what browser are we using? When are we going to have this meeting? How should everybody set up their camera? What does everybody put in a title line in an email? That sets the foundation for consistency inside of the operations that we're doing. And so when you start thinking about how do we communicate? How do we do that with intention? How do we do it quick? So much of this starts with going back to the very basics. And what I would encourage anybody to do, if you haven't done it, is get your team aligned with how you're using each one of these tools. Make sure that everybody, first off, understands how to use them. I sat in on a call yesterday where a guy was going through all the, here's the steps to use Zoom more effectively. And I thought it was a waste of my time, and the first 10 minutes were, but the last 20 minutes were stuff that I hadn't even thought about and consistent ways to use it, and it was great. What you're going to have to get used to is that season slump that you see for the player that's changing their swing, and you're just going to have to deal with a little bit of that to get to the point where you're going faster, and it's worth it.
Let me jump in here if I can really quickly, Martin. I want to piggyback on what you're talking about, the shifting my swing, right? As a baseball player, but also like being on that video call that you talked about yesterday with Zoom tools required us to maybe reshuffle our time and our emotional and physical and maybe even like work capacity in ways that we may not have done 6 months ago. And one of the things that I think we struggled with before, we talked about on yesterday's live stream, that there's pre-COVID-19 and there's post-COVID-19. One of the things that we struggled with pre-COVID-19 was everybody was already really busy. There was already lots of stuff to do. I didn't know many leaders that were saying like, gosh, we got a lot of time on our hands. Does anybody have more work we can do? Instead, people really struggled with, I have so much going on, I don't know how to create capacity for all of that. That kind of stuff requires capacity, right? Rethinking alignment, rethinking different tools and techniques, rethinking the ways in which we're doing our work, the way that we're communicating. And so my encouragement for leaders out there and folks who are struggling with this, even at home, like moms and dads, like it's going to take some time to think about that routine, to think about that alignment, and to rethink our levels of capacity and where we're spending our time and how that time is best maximized from a return on investment perspective, but also a return on people perspective. Because as you mentioned yesterday, Martin, and it stuck with me throughout the day yesterday, we are going to remember how we felt throughout this, and we won't forget that. And our behavior, we know that emotion drives behavior many times.
So I'm glad I wore the baseball jersey today. Seems like this metaphor is taking us pretty far. I've done remote work for a very long time, and I learned early on that the best practices you try to use anytime you're giving a presentation. Say the same thing 3 different ways so people really get it. Well, when remote, you have to assume people are really busy, they're really distracted, there's a lot of noise on the Slacks and Teams, a lot of emails to respond to. You have to assume your message is going to get lost. When you're trying to communicate something, assume a bunch of people missed it. So you really do need to proactively say it over and over in some way. Sometimes it means in the meeting you just kind of say the same thing you sent the memo out yesterday about, just to make sure people's ears are catching it and they're digesting it. There's a difference between hearing it and digesting it, and you'll learn that very quickly in the remote world. 2, say you got 100 things that you need to communicate over the course of the week. Sometimes it's for 5 people, sometimes it's for 100 people, but whatever it is, assume you've got all this to communicate. How can you package that up into fewer messages? How can you give people less to digest, even though you do have to communicate the same amount of information? That's some of the savvy. That's the new swing people are learning right now. There's a little sidebar here. There's a joke we had in our last company. You knew the people in my last company that were the machine gun Kellys, we call them. Every 3 words they'd hit the return on the Slack messages. Instead of one nice paragraph to read, you had 20 notifications for basically one thought, because they hit the return after every phrase. Right? And it was like ding, 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 ding. It's like, please take a breath, compose this as one message. If it's really important, something we want to hold on to, use email. Look at that lasts longer. If this is just a little sort of quick note, use Slack, use Microsoft Teams. If you need to share a file, maybe Slack or Teams isn't the best way to do that. Things get lost in there. It's hard to search in those tools, to be honest. Those are just a few little pieces, but absolutely, as you learn to work in this world where people are distributed, You have to learn how to communicate in this new manner so that you're efficient but also effective. And we could go on and on about all the little tips and tools there, but just like the hitter, you just need reps, right? You just need to stay in there and get your pitches and batting practice, and you start to learn it, and your whole team starts to learn it, and you learn how to support each other as communicators.
I wonder if I could inviting people in when it comes to collaboration. So people who may feel disconnected from work because they're physically distanced from folks, what do you think leaders might be doing in terms of like inviting people, or what's the role of invitation here in collaboration?
That's an interesting question. I would think that there's two parts of it, right? I'm seeing a lot of people raise their hand saying, hey, if you want some free consulting, we'll come in here and give you some advice on how to set up teams and Slack and so forth. But then there's another piece of, as a colleague, making sure that you're not bashful to knock on someone's door and say, hey, Brad, hey, Martin, I'm worried I might have missed something this week, or I heard about this one thing in this meeting. Here's a classic example from yesterday. My wife is a professor. She's obviously now teaching remotely right now. She was in a meeting with her whole department yesterday, and she kind of came away from that meeting saying, "Oh, it sounds like there's some miscommunication. It seemed like they didn't realize about this other thing I'm working on." And I said to her, "You just got to pick up the phone and make a quick call. Just anytime you suspect the least that there's some miscommunication, it's like a tiny little fire. You've got to put that thing out and make sure it doesn't turn into a big fire. Miscommunication can create huge wounds that people aren't even aware of. And my advice is always to just, even if it turns out to just be smoke and no big deal, great. Everyone's going to feel better by you proactively making sure this isn't going to become a bigger deal. You figure out the miscommunication very quickly. So it's almost like everyone needs to develop a sixth sense of, my spidey sense just went off. There might be miscommunication here. And just on the off chance there is, let's attack it. Let's get on a phone call, and don't leave it to texting. Don't leave it to email, Slack call, Zoom call, whatever you want to do, but just talk to the person really quickly, 2 minutes, make sure there's no communication. That'll save 1,000 issues long run.
I think it's interesting for me as you talk about this, because I come from, a lot of my early career was in manufacturing, especially automotive, where I spent my time, was all about defect reduction and process improvement. And, when I think about this on the human side, there isn't good metrics and there isn't good process to show you where you have a defect from a quality standpoint, right? And to me, if I were thinking about this as a manager, I would look at every one of those, whether I'm a manager or I'm an employee. I'm thinking about that as a quality defect, which means something went wrong earlier in the process that caused me to have to pick up the phone. I need to pick up the phone. I need to, pull the end on, stop the line, fix the problem right then and there, because that's how you do it. But then secondarily, everybody should be looking back at their process and making sure that they have things that are in there that help them manage, and think about those things as defects. And a lot of this to me is habits. And what is your habit? What is your routine? Go back to that muscle memory. You need to have routines and structure to build that muscle memory, so that you step by step, you've created the space in your organization so that these things can happen, naturally. And that routine and that structure builds habit, and the habit builds the muscle memory. And it's going to take you 3 to 6 months to really get good and to build that. But one of the things that Brad and I talked, and we spent time on this yesterday offline, is we talked about accountability as being one of the key things in leadership. And most of the time when he says accountability, or when we talk about it as performance management, everyone thinks like, oh, well, that's me as a manager telling everybody what to do. The piece that they're missing inside of that I think is unbelievably important, that we're kind of touching on, but that really needs to be fleshed out, because it's probably one of the more critical things that we're thinking about, is how are we giving people the ability to self-manage? Because accountability on one side is managers saying, I need you to go do this, and if you don't, then I'm going to hold you accountable. I'm going to talk to you about it. But really what people want most is they want to be able to self-manage and know what's expected of them and know how to act. And the front part of this and building that communication and building those habits is giving people a framework so that they can self-manage inside of that. So if I think about my role as a leader and how I drive those actions, how I build that inside my team, I think a lot of that is, are you setting structured time every day or on for those conversations to happen with your employees? And some of that should be around team alignment, some of that should be around one-to-one alignment, and some of that should be around having fun and recognition and just general well-being. And if you haven't set the time on your schedule for those three things, you need to go do that right away, because if not, you're going to have a lot of these fires where there's this miscommunication, and some of that is going to cause problems, not just the miscommunication, but in a person's inability to self-manage.
That's awesome suggestions. Everyone at like 4 p.m. should set something on their calendar to communicate up to their manager about what they were doing this day. Look, if you're proactively communicating up, that manager's anxiety level is going to go down about just having awareness of what are we doing. If that person's anxiety level goes up, that manager is going to become a micromanager very quickly. He's going to start monitoring each employee very quickly because they just don't know. And that uncertainty is causing so much anxiety that I have to do that. So big takeaway here, and I love the point, Martin, make sure you're setting some time every day to communicate up so that you're building trust now with that manager, and that anxiety level on their part's going way down.
Let me jump in here a little bit. I could not agree more. And just an example from my own life of where I've not done this very well is on the home front. We've just kind of, my wife and I are both professional educators. She's a public school teacher. I work at the University of Louisville. We do educate. We like to think we do education really well. We have a 9-year-old at home, and so we're like, we'll just kind of see how this goes. That's a real bad plan. It's by 11 o'clock, I'm frustrated. My wife is frustrated. My daughter's frustrated. Words start flying across the tables and voices start to get elevated. Same thing happens at work, right? If we are using this as an opportunity to just fly by the seat of our pants, just hoping that this is going to work out, that's a real bad strategy. To both of your all's points, this has got to be proactive, putting things on calendars, getting routines down, making sure that our team is aligned, and that takes a different skill set. It takes maybe a slightly different swing than it did 7 days ago, 10 days ago, right? Although if we don't, frustrations rise at work. We get miscommunications through emails and different tones that maybe we didn't intend, but are now coming out. We're sending shorter and shorter emails that are brief and direct, and maybe not the kind of tone that we want to be setting with our team. We've got to do this in a really proactive way.
So let's do some final thoughts here as we wrap up and kind of go around. I'll start real quickly to Brad's point. If you haven't done remote much, you definitely need to hear what Brad said. Tone is often lost until people get good at projecting tone. When people started first using emojis a lot in email and in Slack, I was kind of like, this is for kids. Why are we using emojis in the workplace? But then I got it. Emojis help transfer some tone where sometimes you're writing a short message, tone is lost. So emojis are actually helpful. Embrace that. I know it's kind of weird for some people, but they work. So realize that tone can be lost, and that's why sometimes jumping on a phone is really critical, especially miscommunication. But two, going back to the sports metaphor one more time, people videotape their golf swings for a reason. Sometimes you just don't have self-awareness because you can't see yourself in the mirror when you're performing in the middle of the thing. I think teams should also set aside some time right now, because this is such a big transition, at the end of the week to just talk for 20 minutes. What went well? What didn't go well this week in terms of communication? What can we be doing differently in terms of how we're collaborating right now to make this better next week? That meeting will save a lot of effort and frustrations as you continually look at your golf swing as a team and try to figure out how to improve matters. Who wants to go next? Brad, you want to take it? Oh, did it?
Yeah, I have to. So let me iterate. So, if you're finding that you're out of breath because things are moving too fast, take a pause. Take a step back, reevaluate matters. If collaboration is the heartbeat of your culture, and it's going to be that way whether you're remote, which is our situation right now, or when you get back to work and we're doing in-person things, that level of collaboration that you've got is truly the heartbeat of your culture. Take a pulse check on that, put some routines in place, and make sure that you're taking a proactive approach rather than what I've done the last couple of days here at home, which is kind of a reactive approach where that builds frustration and anger and miscommunication and bitterness sometimes.
All right. Last thought, Martin. You can take us home, or let's say back to one more baseball metaphor. Do you want to knock us in?
Oh man, yeah. The last hit home. So the other thing that we talk to people a lot about, and you mentioned this, like you tape your golf swing for a reason. You don't necessarily know or aware of where you could be better. One of the things that we talk to our leadership teams that we work with a lot is leadership brand, and how do you want to be seen? Who are you as a person? What are the things that really matter to you? How do you want to show up at work? And a great tool that's out there for that, just to give you some feedback and to start building that emotional intelligence, which gives you an idea of like, who am I? Which is a great place to start that exercise of who do I really want to be, is Cloverleaf. And they've got a platform out there. If you go onto our website, onplane.com, it's onplane.com. You'll go out to our partners page. On that partners page, you can link into Cloverleaf. You can do a free profile out there, and they'll send you tips every day on your personality, things you can do better. And then if you want to buy out, they have a paid package where you can start getting tips on your team. But it's great because it gives you that personality map, and it helps you fill in some of those gaps where because we're apart, we don't always get the context. We don't always understand those communication differences, and we didn't do it well together. We're definitely not going to do it well apart, but it's a really, really good tool for that. And we use that all the time, and it's a free way that you guys can start to work on that as you're working remote. So
yeah, we should do a whole episode on personality in the context of collaboration and get someone from Cloverleaf on this as a guest to talk about it. I would love that. All right, guys, this was awesome. And we will be back tomorrow.